Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and today I'm chatting with Jeff Beck, the R&D Marketing and Sales Director for Grandpa Beck's Games. He's also the developer of their two best-selling titles, Cover Your Kingdom and The Bears and the Bees.
I'll pause you there for two of the best-selling titles.
Two of the best-selling things. I'm also going to say you work with your family, developing great casual games. Now, these games are for any experience level, all walks of life. And I think, Jeff, you're also the self-proclaimed pun master or king of dad jokes. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Enjoy writing terrible jokes and the reactions that I get from telling terrible jokes. So that's fame or claim to infamy. But if you've played Cover Your Kingdom, you're well familiar with my terrible attempt at writing puns. So
now, what's your what's your best dad joke? Would you say?
Probably my favorite dad joke of all time is I have a whole series of awful pirate jokes that I tell, but the best one of all of them is, what lies at the bottom of the ocean and shivers? A nervous wreck. Delightfully stupid. Love it.
Mine from this goes back to when I was a kid. It's actually a dirty one, but I'm going to tell it anyways. The white horse fell in the mud.
Very dirty joke.
Yes. Dirty joke. It's a dirty joke. So welcome. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. We have lots of people starting to join in now, and just kind of want to get into your company. So Grandpa Beck's Games, can you give us an overview of what this company is?
So this is a family business that was started by my parents nearly a decade ago. It all started because they've been playing taught them called golf, and it's a traditional face card game. A lot of people have probably played a variation of it at some point in time. And they had a friend of a friend, a connection that they made, who also was an illustrator, who had a system set up for selling products through sales reps, and long story short, they thought it would be this turnkey, easy operation to basically fund creating this one game, and this other guy was going to make it, do the artwork, and then sell it. And it was going to be an easy way to make some money on the side, which was important to my parents at the time because my dad is an airline pilot by profession, and this was in the recession and in the post 9/11 world, and he was worried about eventually the possibility of getting furloughed or his airline getting purchased and losing his retirement. And his retirement really, he hadn't saved a lot in his 401k. Primarily, he had this pension plan, and he was worried about losing his pension. So he wanted an alternate stream of revenue, and thought that this would be an easy, quick, and simple way of making some extra money. And it turned out to not be any of those things, but it did eventually become a successful business through a lot of work by both of my parents. So they produced this first card game, golf, and it was, by all accounts, a tremendous failure. They went through, I think, 2 printings where the packaging was so messed up, or the printing was so messed up that they couldn't sell the games and had to basically just donate them to charity.
Wow.
When they finally got one right, no one really, they took it to golf stores where they thought would be a good place to sell it, and none of them wanted to carry it. And as a company selling a single product, no one wanted to deal with them individually, and no distributors wanted to pick up a single product line that had no history of success, which is a cycle I think a lot of budding game developers experience. Is it's really hard to kind of crack into the market from either end, either directly to consumers or through stores, or selling through a distribution network. So they were met with this initial lack of success, and instead of throwing in the towel, they had another game that was presented to them by some other friends, and they said, this is a better game, we should make this one as well and have another game to add to our line that hasn't taken off. And so they created another game with the help of a friend who is a very talented illustrator. This is a new illustrator, and her name was April Stott, and they created a game called Cover Your Assets. And that game was much more compelling to play than the golf game. And so they took their two little games and they went to Toy Fair. They bought a booth there, and they went and they stood there for a week. And my dad has told me more than once that he remembers standing there in this booth surrounded by these giants of industry. and they had these two little games and looked very homemade in their presentation. And he just kept thinking, what on earth am I doing here? I'm so out of place. I don't know anything about business. I don't know anything about the game world. I don't know anyone here. What are we doing here? But from that initial visit to Toy Fair, they met a couple of really key contacts. They met a distributor in Canada called Lion Rampant, who agreed to take on their games after playing them and saying these are really fun. And they met also the owners of a chain of stores in the Mountain West called Red Balloon Toy Stores, which sold to families. And those two connections kind of gave them the confidence to keep on going. And from there, they started selling products through Amazon, and then went and did dozens of shows over the course of over the next few years throughout the country, mostly in the Mountain West and up in Washington, where my parents are from. And person by person, they introduced people to their games. They taught them how to play. A lot of times, sitting at a card table, folding card table, learning from Grandma and Grandpa Beck themselves. People would sit and learn these games. And even though they didn't have any established brand, and the packaging wasn't most compelling, playing the game, having good experience helped these games to catch on. And eventually they really started to sell via word of mouth throughout the US. Over the next few years, they continued to add additional games. This was done with the help of their kids. They have grown and married with kids of their own.
So you just cut out there, but I think you said, because I know the numbers, there's 5 kids altogether, right? And 17 grandkids?
There's five kids and 17 grandkids. Yeah, so we've got
that's a big family.
It's definitely a big family.
So this whole time, was he still piloting, or did he say, you know what?
Yeah, he is still technically a pilot for Alaska Airlines, though he's in essentially a stage of early retirement. They haven't officially announced the plan, but they're looking like they're going to let some pilots retire early due to COVID and the reduction in flights. So he, for all intents and purposes, is more or less retired now. But he's, up until 2 months ago, he was working full time as an airline pilot and doing the game business on the side. So they've continually added new games over the last few years. Skull King was the third title that we did. We actually launched that one on Kickstarter, and it funded. I wouldn't say it was a successful campaign, but they kind of dipped their toes in the water there. That was several years ago. And then they developed a few more titles, and about 2 years ago, after a few years of me helping them kind of on the side and with as much as I could with my other jobs, they had grown to a point where they really needed some additional help with the marketing and sales and running the business. And so I took a big leap and quit my full-time job as a radiology technologist and came back into my actual kind of my profession of choice, because I originally had studied advertising and marketing, but I had that career kind of waylaid by the recession and gone back to school to do something new and to do something more secure for my family. I was a rad tech for a few years and quit that job. And now I work with my parents part-time. And I also work as the advertising manager for a tech news website and sell their sponsored content. So I've got a couple of hats on, and I work from home now with both jobs. And I have been doing a lot of game development and marketing and outreach, and just kind of dipping my feet fully into the waters of the board game community and getting to know all of these amazing people along the way.
Sure. When did the brand Grandpa Beck's, was that there from the beginning, or is it after a few games? It's like, okay, we need to kind of create an umbrella brand here, or?
It's pretty much established from the start. And the reason that it was named Grandpa Beck's Golf or Grandpa Beck's Games was because our first game had a very ubiquitous name of golf, but they couldn't have a copyright or trademark on the name golf, so they named it Grandpa Beck's Golf. So that was the technical name of the game. And then the next one, Cover Your Assets, technically is Grandpa Beck's Cover Your Assets. So it was done in order to make it easier to copyright and trademark the different titles for the games. Sure. But they also wanted to have their kind of an associated brand for all of the games, because their hope was that they would have more games developed and that people would trust this character, this figure of Grandpa Beck and his games and what they represented of quality family entertainment, and they want to buy more games in that line. So that's kind of how it got got established, and there were a lot of questions of who on earth officially, and a lot of people still ask that until they've heard a little bit of our story and have read the little pamphlet in our games that explains who he is and who our family is.
Yeah, we just got Eric Firsten is in the chat room. He just said, "My family and I love your family's games, and it provides them hours and hours of entertainment." So you definitely got a fan even listening right now.
That's great to hear.
The company.
Yeah.
How have you found that transition? So your dad started the business. You've come on board. How has kind of growing up with games informed the whole process? And what did that transition look like when it went from, okay, here's some games that we've kind of reskinned of classic games to now we're going to develop some of our own stuff, and specifically you as a designer?
So we always grew up playing games in my family. Played all of the classic card games of Uno and Phase 10 and Risk and
Sure.
Monopoly and all of the ones that you'd expect. And some of them we played by the rules in the box, and some of them we adapted and changed. We played cards all the time. It was a cheap form of entertainment. My dad and mom were really poor when I was a young kid because he was going through his flight training and through college and funding that all on his own. His dad was a school teacher and then they had 6 boys of their own. So they didn't have funds to help my dad to get established. So he worked really hard, and my mom cut hair in the evenings after the kids were in bed, and they got by. And a cheap form of entertainment for them was buying a new game, and then they could have friends over, and they could pop some popcorn on the stove, and they had entertainment for weeks on end with this new game. And so I think for my parents, it felt very natural to make a game of their own and to sell it, because they really understood the value of how a $15 game can provide hours and hours of entertainment for a family.
The cost of a movie, you go to a movie with one person, you're spending more than that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the first couple games that they made were adaptations of classic card games. In fact, most of our games are adaptations of classic card games, and it hasn't been so much that we have abandoned that model as we've gotten more advanced in how we've adapted them and added more to them and taken them further from their roots and kind of made them into titles of their own, particularly with Cover Your Kingdom, which is technically an adaptation of Cover Your Assets, which is an adaptation of a classic card game. So that's been one of the roles that I've played in the company. Is I play a lot more games than my parents do. They played games growing up, but their taste in games is based on what was available when they had a young family, and they aren't quite as explorative as I am with their new games. And I love to play everything. I've got a huge cupboard full of titles, and I love to play games and analyze the mechanics within them and figure out the decisions that the designers made and look at the graphic design and how it helps to build the narrative or teach the game or make it easier to play. And I really have a great appreciation for the incredible work that is being done in the industry right now. There are just so many talented developers and really, really great game companies. It's honestly a little overwhelming.
It is. I mean, I think if you would have went back like even 20 years ago, I think most people would have assumed that the board game industry was dead, right? Now you've got game consoles, which have amazing design and graphics and very immersive. What kid's going to want to pull out a board game and play a board game, right? And you had like 2 or 3 players that controlled the entire market. And I think Kickstarter has actually been a big part of that, is really exploding this whole indie industry where there are more games available than you could possibly play in a lifetime. Like there are hundreds of thousands, and there's I don't know what the exact number is, but there's got to be at least 20 games coming out a week. Like there is a lot of games on the marketplace. How have you, like, one question I've come across, because I've reskinned a classic card game in my past. And I always get asked this question. I'd like to get your perspective, where people say, well, how can you take a game that already exists, put, a new kind of skin on it, so to speak, and then sell it as your own? Is there like a copyright infringement there? Is there, do you butt into trademarks? I'm sure you guys get asked this. And so how do you usually respond to people on that? No,
it's very much like the movie industry. And we've seen that there have been several adaptations of Emma or Pride and Prejudice. And those are they were copyrighted at one point in time, but they're now like public works that people have access to. And card games, a traditional classic card game is not owned by anyone. Those rules are, and every variation of a classic card game has a ton of different rules and different names in different regions and different ways of playing it. Something that's been important to us is we've adapted them, though, is to make them our own and change, not just to put some new artwork or a new theme right on the existing game, but to change the structure and change the mechanics and the ratios.
Mechanics a little bit, so it's unique.
Yep, and because you're starting with 13 suits of 4 cards each, and you have some pretty rigid requirements within a classic card game, and those oftentimes are not optimized for the best way for that game to play. It's just what you have to work with, and it's interesting to me that there are so many classic card games, and almost none of them involve removing any cards from a deck or adding any cards to change ratios. It's something that I guess was just not ever really thought of back in the heyday of playing games with face cards. But yeah, it's amazing as well. You could, even if you were to just take a classic card game and then add a theme to it and change some and put new values on the cards, if everything else was the same, it still would be, I believe, a better experience to play it, because people want to have narrative, even if that narrative is very minimal. And even if there's not very much storytelling that's related to the actual mechanics of the game, people enjoy the experience of playing a game that has characters or narrative or beautiful artwork to look at as you're playing it.
Sure. Now, your model thus far has been card games. Now, being the next generation of kind of game developers for the company, do you see yourselves sticking with that model, or do you see yourselves kind of branching out into some of the areas where dice and meeples and classic boards?
Yeah, well, Cover Your Kingdom is our first kind of step in that direction. It has player boards and tokens and the crown, and that shook some foundations here. My desire to add those, because my parents had a model that was working really well with this particular box size, 2 decks, makes it easy, and I keep pushing the boundaries. The Bears and the Bees was the other game I developed, and even just going to hexagonal cards from traditional poker-sized cards was a process and required additional expenses and some new education on our part and learning how to do it correctly, and some experimentation with card thickness and coatings to make that work. So we have kind of a model established of the size of the boxes that we like and the components that we like, but I am working right now on a dice-based version of Skull King, which would be a much more immersive title that, in addition to playing with dice, would involve a game board and some other mechanics that would take the trick-taking game and turn it into a much bigger experience, where the tricks that you win and the points that you earn each round help you to advance through an adventure. And so that's kind of the direction that I am taking the game and also the company, is to include some different components and try some new things.
In terms of your sales channel as a company, you mentioned that your dad's did a lot of conventions and
my dad and my mom. My
and your mom.
Everybody's instrumental.
Your parents, we'll say, yeah.
Yeah, well, my parents. My dad's name is on the box, but my mom has done is
the brains. So he's the face, but she's the brains, I guess, right? Yeah. And so with all these, these trade shows and conventions, it's an insane amount of work. I've worked at a trade show before.
It's a crazy amount of work.
Especially something like a game where it's not like you can just take 30, like people want to see it played, right? So you have to demonstrate and so forth. How is your sales channel now? Is it predominantly online? Is it, how would you break it out, kind of online versus brick and mortars versus still trade show based?
We sell probably 80 to 85% of our games through Amazon. Wow. And then another 10 to 12% through brick and mortar channels. We have some limited distribution, but we sell primarily through direct sales to stores. And we have probably 40 or 50 locations throughout the country that carry our games and believe in them enough that they buy them. They go through the hassle of buying them from us directly, which, as any store owner would tell you, is a big hassle. It's much easier to just order from a distributor and get it all sent, but they're ordering them in quantities of dozens when they buy from us. And in most of the game stores where Grandpa Beck's games are carried, Cover Your Assets is their #1 best-selling product in their store. And then they'll have 3 or 4 other games within our catalog in the top 10 of the items that they sell. And that's not just in family game stores. That's within some that are very much oriented towards the more gamerly crowd. And it's surprising to me how well we do in some of these locations where I would not have anticipated us having much of a market. But The games are great in that they're universal. They really can be played by anyone of any skill set. You can play it with your grandma, you can play it with your kids, or you can play it with the other adult friends that normally play heavier games and still have a good time, because they're really built more around the experience created by the game than the mechanics of the game itself. It's kind of one of those sum is greater than the parts things.
Yeah, and how do you assure, like I know Amazon, since it's so huge, right? And sometimes the risk with brick and mortars is to say, well, it's on Amazon, they're always going to undercut me. How do you reassure these brick and mortar stores that are supporting you, and you know, because that's the one place where they can actually demonstrate a game to somebody, where it's tough to
Yeah.
do that on Amazon unless they're watching a video. How do you assure those people that you know, that you're not going to undercut them, like through Amazon and so forth?
That's a really good question, and it's a legitimate concern that stores have, and we really value our relationships with our stores, which is the primary reason why we haven't got into wider distribution, which we will be this next year, but we're doing it really carefully. And Amazon can be a tremendous tool to stores if you have a product that is really well reviewed, like our games are. Cover Your Assets is actually the number one highest rated product in North America on Amazon in terms of its average review score. It has over a 4.93 star rating or something obscene like that. Usually have to pay for reviews that are that good.
Yeah, and the way Amazon's algorithms work now is Amazon will not, like back in the day, you could kind of game the system and get a bunch of people just to do some review. They can detect affiliations and so forth. So those are real reviews, right?
Yep, they are real reviews, and there's some factors involved in why we have so many and why they're so positive, which with the time that we have today, I can't get into them too deeply, but the main factor is people feel they have a personal connection to the company, and I think that leaves them with a desire to like the game before they've even played it, and then when they have played it, a deeper connection than they'd have otherwise, because they feel like it's something that was shared by my family with their family, and that means a lot to them.
Yeah, I think that's important, right? You need to have that kind of face behind the brand, and quite frankly, the face of the brand is the family. It's your dad, but it's still the family, right? And I think that comes through in everything you guys do.
And it's important to us because our mission really is all about connections and making people, giving people an opportunity to connect across generations with friends, and to find something fun that they can do in common, even though there's a lot that divides us today. So in regards to making Amazon an asset instead of a detractor to the stores, we have been really careful to work with distributors and stores that have promised to not sell on Amazon. And by retaining control of about 95 to 99% of our Amazon sales, we're able to retain our MSRP. And we are committed to our stores to always keep our MSRP where it is. We do run promotions on occasion on holidays, but stores are allowed to do that as well. Oh, okay. So that if someone walks into their store and they say, hey, I saw this game, Cover Your Assets on your shelf, I'm interested in it, can you tell me more about it? The sales rep can pull it up on Amazon, show them the reviews, and see that the price is identical to the penny of what they'd pay in store. And then the reviews help them to purchase it in store because they'd rather have it right then and there instead of having to wait. And it really has to be an exact match. If it's even 50 cents less, you're going to lose some customers going to Amazon. So we spend a lot of time policing Amazon and reminding sellers that pop up on occasion that that's an area that we retain control of, and that we're doing that to help our retailers.
That's awesome. And I'm sure they really appreciate that. You know, it's that, I think that trust level that you establish is going to carry you forward, right? So if future games come and they know, you know what, hey, I can trust these guys. They're not going to screw me. You know, let's bring their next game into the store. You know, they got a good reputation. Reputation's everything.
It is, and it's a good thing for everyone. It's a good thing for us. It's a good thing for the store owners. It's a good thing for the consumer, because we want the consumers to have access to buy those games in more locations. And in order to be in more locations, we have to maintain the prices on Amazon so that the stores feel confident in selling the games. And it's good to be on Amazon for those customers that aren't near a game store or that are immunocompromised and can't go out and shop for themselves right now. We've sold a lot of games that have been delivered to people's homes that haven't wanted to venture out and buy a game at a place where they could be exposed to getting sick. So it's a model that honestly was more of a necessity than an intention. We want to carry our games originally, and And I think that a big part of the reason why the reviews were so positive initially and why they continue to be positive is that a lot of them continue to sell primarily through word of mouth. So the only reason you're there buying the game is likely that you've already played it and you already like it. And so you're very likely to have a positive experience and very likely to leave a positive review, which has been a good thing to an extent, and also a challenge that we're working on overcoming right now. That some of our games have not been as appealing to customers off the shelf as they should be. They aren't conveying the sense of fun and energy that they have in their packaging that they have in reality. So we're in the process right now of working with a graphic designer, really talented duo of graphic designers actually, David and Kathy Bach, and they're helping us to revise our games and overhaul their graphic design so that they'll be more appealing to consumers on the shelf.
Nice. One thing I noticed, and this is my last question because we have just blasted through this half hour, is on your Kickstarter page, and I'd be remiss to congratulate you, quite frankly. You hit, in Canadian dollars, $81,000 on your Kickstarter campaign on Cover Your Kingdom. I think the more important number is 1,861 backers, which is a huge number of backers. So congratulations on that. One thing I noticed in your later pledge levels or in your higher pledge levels, was bundling. And I was wondering if you can just quickly talk about how you've used bundling now of your portfolio to kind of, push your sales forward in these different channels.
Yeah, well, it really is something that we have been able to do through Kickstarter that we haven't been able to do through Amazon, but they just announced that they're going to start to allow bundling again, which will be something that we'd like to do moving forward. The idea of the Kickstarter campaign really was built more around marketing and outreach than it was around capital. I don't know that we made much at all off of the Kickstarter campaign after all of the expenses were factored into it. It was enough, I think, to pay for the first print run of the Cover Your Kingdom, but not much left over after that. And that was all right because we really used it as an opportunity to introduce our brand and our company to a new group that hadn't seen us before, and with a title that was really built to appeal to a new audience with Cover Your Kingdom. And the bundling there was built primarily to encourage people to purchase not just Cover Your Kingdom, but to also fill out the rest of our game line, and for them to take home also Cover Your Assets, Skull King and the Bears and the Bees, which are our three bestsellers in our catalog. And so the pricing was established to make that top tier option of buying Cover Your Kingdom plus getting those other three titles a much more attractive price proposition. And once again, we weren't making as much money as we would through other retail channels, but we really just wanted people to play the games. We know we have a great deal of confidence in the fact that our games are fun to play, and they may not be the biggest or flashiest on the shelves, though we're working on that right now. But we know that if people play them, they are almost always going to have a good time playing them, and they're going to want their friends and families to play them with them, and those will lead to further sales.
Awesome. Where can people find your games? So if somebody wants to go find any of your games, where's the best, other than Amazon, which they can find, but what's the name of your website?
GrandpaBecksGames.com, but that will just direct you to Amazon as well. That's another thing that we're going to set up in the future is more direct sales channels that'll be fulfilled on the back end through Amazon, but where we'll be handling the front end sales so we can have more of an interaction with our customers, which is something we don't have a lot of control on in Amazon. So, but they're also sold in local game stores, primarily throughout the Mountain West and through the Northwest. So call your local game store if you live in those areas and ask if they carry it. We'd prefer that you buy it from them and support them because they're having a tough time, a lot of them, with COVID. But if you can't find them there, then look them up on Amazon, and we'd appreciate you guys trying them out.
Awesome. Jeff, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming on here.
No problem.
This is a fantastic story. I absolutely just sucked it all in. It was great. So all the best to you and your family. And once again, congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. It's great talking.
All right. Take care. Cheers.